everyone, and welcome to Title Now. By now, our members have heard about the new FinCEN real estate reporting rule. At least we hope you have. It goes into effect December 1st. There will be significant practice changes that will affect all members with this rule. Naturally, the fund prides itself on providing resources, guidance, education, and practical tools for you to use in your practice when the industry presents these types of challenges. Here with me today is Jay St. Lawrence. He is the fund's Regulatory Compliance Counsel, and he's here to talk to us about the resources that Jay and the Legal Education Department here at the fund have put together for you to have at your disposal all in one place on thefund.com. Today, Jay is actually going to also walk us through those resources. He's going to actually take us for a tour on his laptop so you can see exactly where to find these additional tools. And he's going to discuss some of the high points of that rule with us today. So without further ado, welcome, Jay.
Hi, thanks, Shannon. Good to be here with you on the podcast. As you said, I'm a Regulatory Compliance Counsel, so with legal education and you and others, we're all working on trying to get information about this rule out there. One of our primary resources is the Fund Resources FinCEN page, which is full of all kinds of information. We're adding to it all the time. We're trying to add links for basically everything you would need to get started to understand the rule, supplement the webinars and programs that we've rolled out on this issue. So whenever you want, we can start looking at that page.
Well, before we get to that, why don't you tell our members a little bit about what you do for the fund as Regulatory Compliance Counsel?
Okay. Well, I'm in the Legal Education Department and have been for many years, and we generally produce educational type programming. We do webinars, we do town halls, we work with underwriting and others at the fund to get information out there, usually accredited CLE type stuff with the Florida Bar and also with the Department of Financial Services. Sometimes with the NALA paralegal group, and we present those usually on Tuesdays at noon. Hopefully people are familiar. The regulatory compliance bit is an additional thing that I work on with other people such as yourself here at the fund to try to stay on top of regulatory matters, whether it's statutes, DFS regulations, the Florida Administrative Code, the Florida Bar, all the things that real estate attorneys and settlement agents have to concern themselves with as part of their settlement business. There's a lot of different things we have to comply with, and this FinCEN residential real estate rule is a big addition to the things we have to concern ourselves with. So all of us are trying to stay on top of this for you guys, and I'm happy to be part of trying to digest that material and articulate it for people so that you can hopefully go and find the answers that you need when you need them.
Well, that makes you the perfect person to run through this resources page with us today. So I guess if you could maybe give us an overview of the rule. I know there's a lot to it. You have given the presentation at Assembly. You could talk about this for 30 minutes or an hour and 30 minutes. There's so much to it, but we don't have that kind of time today. So let's hit some of the high points. For instance, what transactions are covered under this new rule?
Okay, so and one thing that will help for people is that some of us in Florida have already been concerned with FinCEN's geographic targeting orders. The idea there, as everyone is probably pretty well familiar, is that if you have a residential purchase and sale where the buyer is a business entity and formerly under the GTOs, not a trust, that has changed. And there was no institutional financing involved. In other words, you're not working with a bank that is already required to report suspicious transactions to the Treasury Department If it's a transaction like that, and formerly it was at a threshold of $300,000 or more and in specified geographic locations, then we had to do some reporting. And this involved a thing called the Currency Transaction Report, where you go online with the government. That is the Bank Secrecy Act website, or BSA. You go and set up an account, and you download a form, you fill it out, you upload it. And that, up until now, has only been for people in 11 specified Florida counties. And you know who you are if you've been working with those already. This rule, and we sort of expected this because the GTOs have been temporary measures of 180 days in length.
Right. So it's been 9 years or so that we've had the GTOs, and they keep extending them. It would be 180 days at a time. They started off with, a pretty restrictive number of counties and transactions that it would apply to, and over this 9-year period, it's expanded.
They keep broadening
more and
it.
more.
Right. I think it was at first just Miami-Dade, and then they added Palm Beach. And at first, the transactional threshold was way up at $1 million. That got lowered to $300,000. Other counties were added. So we saw a pattern of expanding the coverage of the geographic targeting orders since 2016, I think, when they started. So we all kind of knew this was coming. They clearly didn't want to continue doing temporary measures. So we expected a permanent rule and perhaps a broadening of that. And that's exactly what we've got with the FinCEN Residential Real Estate Rule, or the FinCEN Residential Real Estate Report, both of which are part of all this. The way this one works, the primary differences are, first of all, it's permanent, or until somebody does something about it at the federal level. There is no expiration on these. It starts December 1st of this year. And we expect, we're under a geographic targeting order right now. We expect FinCEN to probably fill the gap between the last GTO and the beginning of this new rule with another temporary GTO, probably in October is when our current one ends. So we expect the new rule, which starts in December, is much broader in several ways. For one thing, it's presumably permanent. For another, there is no geographic limitation anymore. It's all U.S. states and territories, so everybody's going to have to deal with this. There is no dollar threshold anymore, and in fact, in some circumstances, a gratuitous transfer could actually be covered.
So that means all of the people who may purchase a property in their personal name, but then later decide to deed that property over to a business entity like an LLC, or deed it to their trust, those transactions are now reportable?
Well, if it's in the present transaction, you look at what's right in front of you. If somebody's going to do something else with the property later, that's not so much the concern. But yeah, absolutely. If you're going to do a conveyance, if you're looking at a conveyance in front of you, that is, again, this is to the purchaser must be a business entity or a trust. That's another difference. So trusts were a big exception under the GTOs that people were very, I think, happy to see. Trusts are no longer generally exempt. There is a narrow exemption for a family-type trust where the the buyer is taking title in a trust where they are the settlor and beneficiary, and it is gratuitous. There's a narrow exception for that. Also for a few other things that we can talk about if you want. But generally, trusts are no longer exempt. There was some ambiguity around nonprofits. Those are explicitly not exempt. Co-ops are covered. They always have been. And I guess the last bit of the requirement that I didn't get to a minute ago is the reporting involves revealing the beneficial owners behind the business entity making the purchase. So there's so many other details. I don't know if we got to that. But what the federal government ultimately is looking for is information on who owns these business entities or trusts who are purchasing residential property without institutional lenders involved, who could report on any apparent money laundering activity. So you're essentially reporting potential money laundering activity to the federal government whenever these other things are in place.
So the information that we're collecting is not something that you would normally collect in a transaction that we would do today, unless it's under the current GTO. It's going to affect your cash buyers who are used to mainly coming in the office or not even coming in the office, maybe just signing a settlement statement, if they sign that at all, just sending their money and going on their merry way. It's usually the seller that has to provide all of their private information, like their social security number and their name and address. Now, from my understanding, is that you have to report the purchaser's name, address, social security number, date of birth, and their account number for where these funds are coming from. If they wire to you, you need that information from the account it came from.
Right, that's another element of all this. So under the new rules, again, everything's broader. There's some minimal reporting on the seller, basically their identity, stuff like that. As the reporting person, you have to report the basic information about who you are. And under the new rule, by the way, this is another change, settlement agents are the typical responsible party. Under the GTOs, technically it was the title insurance underwriter, and they were acting through their agents, which is why the agents ended up dealing with it. But under the new rules, settlement agents are right at the top of a hierarchy FinCEN calls the cascade. There's a list of people who might be involved in certain roles in the transaction, beginning with the settlement agent, who would be the responsible person. So it literally is a federal regulatory obligation on the settlement agent. So we need a little information on the seller, a little information on the reporting person, and very extensive information on the buyer. Again, what they're trying to get to ultimately are the beneficial owners. But as you said, there's another element to that too, where the money coming in has to be reported. If there is, whatever the sources of money are, we have to report the name of the financial institution it came from, the account number, which is something I imagine people might get hung up on, but we'll need that as well. Any of these transactions that qualify where there's not an institutional lender involved, all of this extensive information, the form that is part of the regulation has 116 fields, I think. You're not going to use all of them in every case, but that's the sort of size of this thing, of this report that's going to be required. So it's quite extensive, and as you said, it covers the money coming in, extensive information about the buyer, a bit on the seller, and a bit on the reporting person.
I'm thinking of transactions that I used to handle as a member, and Aunt Edna maybe put up the money for her favorite nephew to buy his first home.
Sure.
So now you have to report Aunt Edna's account number and information, even though she's not even the purchaser. So that's wild.
Wherever the money is coming in from to the settlement agent in one of these transactions, that's right. They want the name of the institution, the account number, and so forth. So it's a lot, and some may consider it, intrusive or quite involved. But there you have it. It's the law.
Well, good thing we have the resources to help members with this. So if Jay, if you could share your screen. We can walk through the resources page at thefund.com.
There we go.
And talk about some of these things you and the legal ed team put together for us.
Sure. Let's take a look. So you get to this, if you're on the home page, there's a resources tab, and then you can pick the FinCEN page. And this has been, if you're familiar because you've looked at it in the past, we've had this page to help with the GTOs, but it's been greatly expanded to reflect all the new information that we have regarding the rule. So the focus of this page now is on the residential real estate rule. You can see the hyperlinks in blue throughout, just from the top of the page here. You can go and look at the rule itself. I'll leave that for now. We can look at it if we want to in a moment. We have information on our upcoming programs. For example, on September 4th, we're going to have a webinar focused on dealing with collecting the information.
So let's talk about that. Alta has put together collection forms, and those I see are also on this page. So what you're saying is you have a webinar coming up that kind of does a more deep dive into the collection. Does it talk about the forms themselves, or what are you going to be covering on September 4th?
Yes, and we're still actually polishing this up as you and I sit here today, but our thinking is this. We're going to talk about the Alta collection forms. As you said, Alta has, or American Land Title Association, has developed a comprehensive set of collection forms for the seller and the buyer. The buyer form is the longest one. It's 9 pages. And they're great forms, they're great tools. They go into great technical detail to make sure that you are hitting every single thing under the regulation. So you can use these as a guide. A concern we had was if you go into these forms cold, it's a lot. It's a lot to look at, it's a lot to think about. And another consideration is from your sort of office procedures point of view, how are you going to go about collecting? Are you going to hand a party, this 9-page form and say, hey, I need to take a look at this and fill it out? That might be overwhelming for some people. If your buyer has counsel or they're sophisticated, they might want that. They might want every bit of it. So what our presentation on September 4th considers is a couple of different approaches that you might take. You could give someone the entire form. One thing we're going to look at is the possibility of curating these collection forms where your parties may not need every single page. For example, the Alta form, again, very thorough, great tool, but there's a whole page on the accepted transactions. Well, if you've got an accepted transaction, you're not doing this. So that's something the settlement agent is probably figuring out on their own. That's a piece of paper you could take out of the stack that you're handing to someone.
Sense.
So we're going to talk about that. And we've also developed, one of my colleagues in legal education has developed a shorter version of the form, which is really just the facts, please. Just a nuts and bolts type of thing. So you might use that form or use the two in conjunction. We're not trying to tell people how to run their closing procedures, but to give you options and suggestions, because there's going to be a period of time where you're figuring out how you want to explain this to people and how it's going to work best in your office. So we're going to try to get at that in this webinar on September 4th.
It does make sense, unless you have a rare instance where your buyer is a trust and an LLC. If you have 2 buyers, that you're probably not using all 9 pages. So
right, that's another thing. The collection form rightly has separate sections for trust transferees and non-trust entities, because those are slightly different requirements. If you have a trust purchaser, then you have to get into trustees and beneficiaries. There's a whole other category of persons whose identities have to be reported. So you don't need both. That's one thing to consider is, if you have a trust, they need the trust information. If it's a non-trust entity, they need different information. So we're going to try to look at all of that. We're going to have 3 of us in there, I think, on this program, and really try to, discuss this a little from a, practical point of view, and just give people things to think about and strategies they might use in order to be clear with your clients and parties so that they can get you the information you need to do this reporting.
One thing that I know members have already started to ask about is, say they're collecting all of this information on behalf of the buyer, how long do they have to hold on to this information? And what do they have to hold on to? Do they need the whole trust document now? And do they need to store that and keep that for so many years? How does that work?
Well, I guess there's 2 things to think about. One is what's required, and that's minimal. You don't have to keep the real estate report, as we're calling it, itself. There is no retention requirement on that. If you have taken the special step of designating a separate reporting person, which you can do under some circumstances, you have to hold on to that agreement for 5 years. Anything else, I think it's up to you and your office procedures and policies as far as what you believe you need to keep. I would point out maybe, though, that the real estate report itself is going to have, as you suggested, pretty sensitive information on it.
Right.
So this is up to other people, but to individual agents. But you might have a policy where those are not retained in order to protect yourself from possible, in the event of any kind of an incident with your data, anything getting out into the wild that shouldn't. But FinCEN itself does not require you to keep anything other than, again, a designation agreement if you've selected someone else to be the reporting person.
Okay, interesting. So moving right along on this website, what else do we have on here?
We've got a few things we can show people. Again, it's pretty thorough. Here you can register for our upcoming webinar. Here you can, for free, at any time you want, look at our basic overview webinar that we presented. This is similar to the program we presented at Assembly that talks about the rule itself, all the generalities along with materials that include parts of the rule, parts of the upcoming form, the FAQs from FinCEN, which are quite helpful. So you can watch that anytime you want here. Here's the website for the rule itself, the official bit, if you want to go and review it yourself, as lawyers may want to do.
That's FinCEN's website.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
That is the FinCEN's website.
Okay.
Down here, we have instructions and a link for setting up a BSA e-filing account. If you've already been filing GTOs because you're in one of those designated counties, you don't need a new account. You should be able to use this one, as far as we know, for the new report. If you haven't been doing GTO reporting, you're going to need to set up an account on the BSA website. Here's the link. We also have a separate video on setting up the account. You may or may not need that, but if you want to see a walkthrough on setting up the account and answering certain questions, we have a video for you linked right there.
So that's a great example of something members can do today to prepare.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can set up your account immediately. There's no need to wait unless you want to. There's also not a rush. I don't think there's a terribly long process in setting it up, but the more prepared, the better. So it certainly wouldn't be a bad idea to go look at that, familiarize yourself with it. If you don't have a BSA e-filing account, go and get one and be ready, because that's what you'll be using for this mandatory report starting in December.
It seems to me that you wouldn't want to wait for the first transaction to get your BSA e-filing account
I would
open.
not. No, I would not.
Because there is a time restriction in filing the report as well for the transaction. So tell us about that. I know it's the later of.
Yeah, it's 30 days after the transaction is the overall guideline that you've got.
Yeah, I think I read 30 days after the transaction or the last day of the month following the transaction.
Correct. That's right.
Is later.
The later of those. So roughly 30 days, but that's what you've got to do, and you obviously don't want to sit on that.
Right.
It's a federal regulation, so we don't need to try to impress or frighten people. But obviously there are sanctions if you were to be found to not be in compliance. There are monetary sanctions if it becomes if there is a pattern of abuse or neglect, there is prison time available and so forth. So you definitely want to be on top of this and be ready to comply.
Yeah.
Going down the page here a little bit, we have a few things to look at. We've got a fact sheet, and I can open up some of these links, Shannon, if you want.
Sure.
We've got a paradigm, which I think I've already opened up here. There we go. So this is a little paradigm we put together, which is just a basic sort of decision tree type flow chart with the very basic information, but you might want to keep this handy in the office. Up here we have a very abbreviated explanation of what constitutes a covered transaction. So you've got a transfer of real property with a structure designed for 1 to 4 family occupancy or land. This is another expansion of the rule from the GTOs, by the way. Vacant land on which the transferee intends to build residential property is now covered. Shares in cooperative housing, and all of this without financing through an institution required to have anti-money laundering procedures. This is the description of a covered transaction, sort of writ large.
Okay, so right there, I'm thinking, okay, I have a buyer coming in, they don't want to fill out any of this information. They're going to tell me that they don't intend to build a house on this property. May I rely upon that information? Should I get that information in writing? Should I hang on to that information in my file?
Right. So yes, and then up to you. So what FinCEN has done with the rule, because I think everyone immediately had a concern, what about non-cooperation? Right? And that's got to be running through every agent's mind. You start asking people for somewhat invasive information about their identity and finances. They might drag their feet. They might be hesitant. So what FinCEN has is a reasonable reliance standard. You are permitted to take someone's word for it, and it doesn't even have to be the party. You can get the information that you need anywhere you can reasonably get it. The only stricture on that is if you have a good reason to suspect that the information might not be accurate. So you can't have, and obviously none of our members would do this, but you can't have sort of a nod and a wink where someone is saying, oh yes, this is the case, and you just take their word for it knowing full well that's not true. You can't do that, obviously. But
So if
short
they
of that,
ask you to
yeah.
notarize their notice of commencement next, you probably should maybe think twice about taking their word for it.
Right, right. If it's right in your face that they're not telling you the truth, then you can't accept it. But otherwise, you can. You can take the information. As far as keeping records, Shannon, I know you're a practitioner for many years doing this sort of thing. So I think your own notion of defensive practice should dictate what you hold on to. But if it were me, generally, I think, yes, paper your file with where you got the information. Consider the possibility of someone ever challenging you and saying, gosh, you shouldn't have done it this way. You shouldn't have accepted this information. Surely you want something in your file, whether it's an email, some communication showing where you didn't make this information up or unreasonably rely on something that clearly wasn't true.
That makes sense to me.
All right. So, and again, I'll just run through the paradigm a little bit here.
This
might
is
be
great.
helpful.
Sorry I interrupted after the first square.
No, that's good stuff.
All right.
So yeah, here is the basic description. Obviously, if you don't have that, we're not doing a report. If you do, you are. And then down here we have the deadline that you just so well articulated. We've got to file our report electronically through that BSA e-filing portal, just as Shannon said, on the final day of the month following the month of closing or 30 days, calendar days after closing. And it doesn't say here, but as you said, it's whichever is later. So you have the longest possible time frame. And then over here we have, I've set exemptions. I think someone has correctly pointed out within the rule, they're a little inconsistent as to how they define these, but you could also call them accepted matters or uncovered matters. So there are a few examples of situations where you would otherwise have a covered transaction, but it's not covered because of the nature of it. And generally these follow along with things that FinCEN considers low risk for various reasons. And we can run through those a bit if you want to, just to remind people.
But those are mainly the transactions where there's maybe some other version of reporting going on somewhere.
I think that's the idea. I think you could read into it that, what FinCEN's concerned about is, is there some authority involved in the transaction, some institutional, whether it's a court or a lender that is under an obligation to report suspicious activity to the Treasury Department already? If that's in place, they're not worried. There's a couple of other instances where they consider things low risk. One is the sort of family trust situation here we describe. So transfer to a trust by an individual, and this is, I didn't have room, with or without their spouse, without consideration, so gratuitous, where the transferor and or their spouse is both a beneficiary and a settlor. So a sort of a family trust gratuitous transfer, if it falls in this category, I think this is just generally considered low risk. They're not worried about this being a money laundering situation.
Right.
Transfers resulting from the death of an owner, and we didn't articulate this here, but the most obvious case would just be operation by law.
Right.
You've got joint tenants, tenants by the entireties. So, your spouse or co-owner passes away or something, that doesn't become a reportable transaction simply because there's no lending involved. And a little deeper, transfers generally out of an estate, including to or by a personal representative. There's a little more to that in the rule if you need to dig. Transfers generally overseen by a court. So they separately laid out here transfers due to bankruptcy court orders or other sort of receivership situations. Those come out from coverage. And just as you said, I think the idea here is there's some sort of institutional authority overseeing things. So again, the government's less worried that something is going on behind the scenes. Easements, transfer, create, convey, modify, these are not covered. Transfers pursuant, again, to a court order, and they specifically laid out a divorce order. So the language in the rule is something about due to a divorce, but if you read it in carefully, it's not tangentially related to a divorce. It's where there is a final settlement agreement or property settlement agreement that commands that property be transferred.
Right.
That's not going to be covered. Again, anything generally supervised by a U.S. court, so it's coming out of a court order, the court's requiring it, that sort of, overarches the divorce and bankruptcy ones as well. This was one we sometimes get questions about under the GTO. If you've got a 1031 exchange, so the initial transfer into your qualified intermediary is not a covered transaction. You don't have to report the intermediary. If the ultimate recipient of the property would be covered based on it's a business entity and so forth, then they could be reportable, but
Okay.
not the intermediary.
Okay, that's a good distinction.
The last one's maybe a little wacky. Transfers that don't involve any reporting person. So there's a 7-tier hierarchy or cascade of people involved in the transaction that could be the reporting person, as I kind of alluded to. Up at the top, you have the settlement agent. I don't remember them all in order, but we've got the person who prepared the deed. The title insurance underwriter becomes a possible reporting person around level 4, something like that. So if you get all the way down to 7, and that would be tough to do.
It really would. There would have to be some sort of magic trick.
It would be strange.
A transfer of property without any of those.
Without recording a deed, without dispersing
or
funds.
preparing a deed.
Right, all of that. So if somehow you had a transaction that didn't do any of those things, then FinCEN allows for the possibility that wouldn't be reportable.
And you probably don't own the property.
Right, right. So yeah, that's just the paradigm. That's another example of sort of guides and things that we have. We do have the ALTA forms up here, and I've actually pulled one up. I hope ALTA doesn't mind if we show you just quickly. This is the form, and again, very thorough, very effective. If there's any doubt that you're covering part of the rule, I would at the very least keep this on hand in your office as a guide to make sure that you're doing it all right. What we're going to try to talk about on September 4th is, logistically, practically, do you hand this to parties and ask them to figure it out on their own? Maybe not. Maybe you want to help them with that or curate it. But I would keep these forms handy, and they're available for download from the resources page. And there is a buyer's and a seller's form. Again, the buyer's is more extensive,
right.
But we do need seller information too. We've also put together some of our concept articles. We have a few of them on the FinCEN rule, so if you just want to refresh your memory with any of these, we have those here. Some of these I've written in the Compliance Corner section. Others have been written by others, underwriters and legal education attorneys. You can watch an ALTA webinar here as well. We've got other on-demand training. So again, here's how to set up your BSA e-filing account. This is going back to sort of the GTO world with the currency transaction report. This is not so much applicable to the new rule.
Okay.
And again, here's a link to the So Long GTO Hello Forever reporting. Again, that's our general program on the new rule. It's about 50 minutes if you want to watch that.
Okay.
Other helpful stuff, FinCEN itself has 2 very useful FAQs that you can use to sort of read about the rule in good plain language. I'd say for a federal agency, they did a pretty good job explaining in pretty plain English how the rules work. We have our fund alerts that have gone out at various points on all of this. So really a pretty comprehensive list now of the information that we have gathered that we hope will be of assistance to our members as you prepare to comply with this thing.
Well, it sounds like there is a lot to prepare for. One of those things that members are going to have to do is help their real estate professionals also prepare. And I do know that on here you all have included a document, a flyer of sorts that could be used to help realtors get familiar with this new rule and kind of set expectations so they can help get this information from.
Absolutely.
I mean, not that they have to go and collect this information for you, but they could help encourage the buyers and sellers to be cooperative in getting you this information.
Absolutely. We just put that together, and it's linked to the page, but I pulled it up separately just for sort of ease of use here. So here this is just 2 pages. We just put this thing together. And the idea here is, just as you said, to help educate the realtors and brokers that are, you're working with and are bringing you business, so that they can help you and understand what's going on. We don't want anyone to be taken by surprise. I don't know about you, but I have a theory that if you set expectations with people, they tend to be less frustrated. So the sooner in the transaction you can let people know that we're dealing with this, the better. And this is just 2 pages. It spells out what the rule applies to, what kind of transactions in pretty plain language. We'll have that available. It's right there on the website. We'll also be distributing it, I think, at the webinar. But this is something that we envision that you could share, as you said, with other real estate professionals so that they can, 1, understand the rule, and 2, help you give parties a heads up and give you a heads up when one of these transactions is headed your way.
Yes, so between now and December 1st, these real estate professionals can get familiar with this rule just as our members have. So that's very helpful. Thank you so much, Jay, for walking us through everything that's on this site. It's my understanding that you're going to continue to add to this site and keep providing whatever new resources members might be able to use. One thing I did want to bring up with our members is that there is an emergence of third-party vendors who are making themselves known. There's a big push on LinkedIn where I've seen one, and they offer services that help either with just the reporting to the BSA portal, or they even have more elaborate kind of AI and secure methods for collecting the information from your buyers and sellers to help you with that reporting. So there is some good news on the horizon that there seems to be very legitimate third-party services that could be used by members who are going to be facing a lot of these transactions, and they help quite a bit. And as we learn more, we'll do our best to bring you anyone that is vetted to the funds marketplace, of course. But meanwhile, I think we should tell members that we have an email address for you all to use, that if you have questions regarding FinCEN, you can submit those questions to us here at the fund at fincen@thefund.com. So as usual, thank you so much for joining Title Now. Please do subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. If you go to YouTube, you can actually see the video of the podcast as well, and that will subsequently be pushed out onto our website on thefund.com. And thanks again, Jay, for joining us today. This really is a fantastic page for our members, and we really appreciate your work in getting that done.
Thank you, Shannon. It was nice talking to you.
Thank you, and thank you all for your support of the fund.